So a very lovely turnout today for our July 2023 meeting of the Metropolitan Study Group. Welcome to everyone, wherever in the world you are. It's great to see everyone. Today, the presentation is going to be, as far as I'm aware, a first for the Metropolitan Study Group, in as much as the presentation's being given by people who are not members of the SRIA. However, the purpose of the study group is, and really of the purpose of the SRIA in many respects, is to assist each other in the study, ongoing study and exploration of the hidden mysteries of nature and science. And so in this particular way, it's not important that people are necessarily members of the SRIA. What's important is that we all share an interest in the subject matter. There's a saying that I really appreciate, which is the map is not the territory. The order is not the thing. I'm interested in exploring the territory, and that's what this particular study group is really all about. And so we open this to all people of like mind and temperament so that we can help each other to explore these various mysteries and their interconnections. So Barry is joining us from Barry Down, is a spiritual astrologer and long-standing student of the mysteries from the Western mystery tradition. And he's known the other presenter, Cath Thompson, for many years. They were involved in a group who worked some time ago. And I will leave them to introduce that work and to describe where they met, if that's part of what they wish to share with people, how they met and so on, and the work that they've been involved with in the past and how that's remanifested now at this time. As I say, I've known Barry for some time, and as an astrologer, he's deeply, deeply knowledgeable. I feel blessed to know Barry, and he has been for some time my kind of astrological sounding board, and I value his friendship very, very much indeed. So he is, I look forward to this presentation very, very much with great interest. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to both Cath and Barry. I'm just going to change the view so that it's on speaker view. So whoever speaks will be viewed on the screen for the recording, for the sake of the recording. I'm going to make sure that everybody is muted. So let me just, Barry and Cath, once I've muted everybody, you're gonna have to unmute yourselves again. Sorry for the inconvenience, but here we go. I'm muting everyone now. So Cath, if you could unmute yourself, and Barry, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Done.
That's fantastic. And I'm just gonna set this to speaker view so that whoever's speaking will be on the screen. Just 1 second. Okay, over to you both.
Oh, over to you, Barry.
Okay, hello everybody. Lovely to meet so many people. Quite an interesting mix. I hope you'll be interested in what we have to share with you. This is a work which has been going on for many, many years, dating back to 1976. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Barry Down, and this is my dear friend, Cath Thompson. And we were both members of a esoteric group, which was formed by a gentleman called Jim Lees. Jim Lees was a self-taught adept along the traditions of the Western magical tradition. We studied this along the traditions of the Golden Dawn and the Hebrew Qaballa, with the works of Israel Regardie, Dion Fortune, and a particular focus on the Tree of Life and esoteric astrology. And this was our background. We have absolutely no connection whatsoever with any other group other than the works of Regardie and and the Golden Dawn. And as a group, we were Jim Lees was our mentor, and he ran the group. He was the former of it, and we worked exclusively together with that, and occasionally had contacts with people like William Gray, who was the tradition, the Western tradition. Cath, yeah.
Can I speak? I just wanted to say that Jim also was not a member of any other order. He did his own studies and started the group himself. And we were never affiliated with anybody. We did our own initiation ceremonies, and we were completely independent as long as we lasted, which was about 11 years all told. Back to Barry again.
Oh, thanks, Cath. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so what we did was in the early days, we did a lot of the seasonal ceremonies, celebrating the various stations of the equinoxes and solstices. And we also spent a lot of time studying Qaballa from the Tree of Life and the various spheres of the Tree of Life and the astrological correspondences, and also the higher angelic realms associated with the Hebrew Tree of Life. And as we came to a point where Jim Lees took an interest or caught his curiosity at a rather unusual manuscript. Now, at this point, I'm going to introduce, this is the genesis of the discovery of the English Qaballa. And it was a key from this manuscript. The manuscript I'm talking about was delivered to Aleister Crowley, who we're very well familiar with, and his background. But in 1904, in Cairo, his wife, Rose, who was his medium, instructed him stating, "They want to speak to you." And he got a little bit irritated with her because she was so insistent. And he said, "Well, who and what?" And she instructed him that he was to sit before the window at midday on 3 consecutive days in 1904, and just to wait. At this point, he duly did, and he said the midday came on the first day, and he became aware of a presence in the room, which spoke to him in pure, unaccented English. And this was an audible being, and it instructed him on no circumstances was he to turn around and look, but he was just to write what he was dictated. And this is what he duly did. And he wrote the 3 chapters of what is called, the Book of the Law. So Crowley realized he'd been given something unusual and tried to decipher a key to what was written using Hebrew Qaballa. He then got frustrated because it made no sense to him whatsoever. And he discarded the manuscript and threw it to one side for many years. Which after a while he came back to, Yeah, I think when he was cleaning his attic out or something, and realized it was quite significant, and once again failed to make any sense of it. And in his own words, he spent the rest of his life trying to retrieve his reputation that he'd cultivated. So this was the manuscript that Jim Lees looked at. What it stated in a line in this manuscript, which there's an injunction that it should not be changed in so much as a letter. And it was always to be reproduced intact, unaltered. And so we sort of fast forward now to 1976, when Jim picked this manuscript up and thought, well, I wonder if I can make sense of it using the Hebrew. But there's a line in the manuscript which states, "Ye shall discover the order and value of the English alphabet." Well, this actually came to pass. Jim Lees discovered this, the order, and it was rather strange. I happened to be there on the Sunday evening when this happened, and I think you might be able to help me out here, Cath. We were trying to use Qaballa, the numerical geometry of the Hebrew Qaballa, and we were adding the various words and sentences up as one does in gematria, and on our calculators, no matter what number we put into the calculator, I think the number came up. The total was 286. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. And the thing about 286 is that interested Jim was that 286 is the sum of 13 times 22. And there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And it's also the sum of 11 times 26. And there are 26 letters in the English alphabet. So Jim left the letter A with the value 1 and counted 11 letters for going ABC, but counting up to the 11th letter. And it came to L, and then he counted another 11 letters, and it came to W. And he carried on like this till he got round the entire alphabet and back to the beginning again. It joins up, it makes a star. And this here is the order and value of the English alphabet as discovered by Jim Lees in 1976. And that was that 286 that appeared spontaneously on everybody's calculators was the clue that opened it up. And this lot was the result.
Yes, and we this was the it's not a PowerPoint, but this is the 26-pointed star, of which the Cath is reproduced in her in a volume of her books, which she'll expand later. But so
it's what I like to call a power edge presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So what this came from this was an astrological system. I'm just referring to my notes here. So when the order and value of the English alphabet, when applied to this manuscript, the Book of the Law, it turned the key and revealed an initiatory system of astrological stellar magic. And stellar, it proved it, and what has come out of this is it's that by aligning oneself with the cosmos and with the stars, and performing ceremony to mark these times, it actually brings on an initiatory process. And what we discern from this, that this knowledge was clearly known to the ancients, and the remnants of this astrological system, you know, is scattered through the esoteric branches of the world's belief systems. So this predates anything that, you know, in the modern Western tradition. It goes back to the foundations of knowledge, of esoteric knowledge, which is astrology. And if you bear with me, folks, just to talk a little bit about astrology and the purpose of initiation. And I've written down here a little quote in my own words, that the purpose of initiation is to bring into our mundane consciousness a comprehension of the divine within us and our connection to the divine. And any practice less than this great path, this great work of individual, authentic connection with divinity. And I wrote here, in the words of the introduction of MacGregor Mather's translation of the Greater Key of Solomon, the introduction there is said, "O neophyte, all is vanity." So anything less than the connection with, raising our personal connection with the divine is vanity. And we see that there's many systems around the world that get sidetracked and away from this in the magical tradition. I like to use an allegory here of astrology as the stained glass window. Is that if an astrologer is given the date, the time, and the birth of a baby, and I have no connection with that baby, I'll speak in the first person. If I don't know them at all, it may be someone comes along and says, "Can you draw a chart up for my grandchild?" I can draw an astrological chart, as any astrologer can, and discern the life path and the character of that baby. So that begets a bigger question. Well, who is that baby? I don't know the mortal child. I'm discerning this character and personality from the position of the celestial bodies, the planets and their angles to one another and the signs that they occupy. So the way I like to look upon this is, if we look upon the planets as the gods on the Mount Olympus having a conversation. So Venus will talk about art, Jupiter will talk about spirituality and expansion. Saturn will talk about time and crystallization. So in a chart, these angles and relationships are a conversation that's going on amongst the deities at the time of the birth of this child. And of course, this child is every one of us. We are a conversation of the gods made manifest at our birth. And our life path is the unfolding of that conversation. This is in astrological terms, which many of us here are maybe astrologers and are familiar with. We cannot get away from the fact that we are celestial beings, or conversations of. And I look at the personality as presented in a chart and say, well, who is this? And once again, I use a description that the soul goes into the car lot and says, what vehicle am I going to drive this time? And the soul may choose a Rolls Royce, a Cadillac, or whatever. The soul gets into that vehicle, which is the natal chart, and drives through life's path with it, and having an experience. But the soul itself is immortal, and it belongs to it has a connection with divinity. And so I use come to the allegory of a stained glass window, that each of these planetary archetypes, if we think of them as a color that make up of a stained glass window, and those colors come together in a certain pattern, and that window is our personality. And the words of the hymn, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, I think, is, if a man who looks on glass, on it may stay his eye, but if he pleaseth, through it pass, and then the heaven espy. So if each of our personalities is a stained glass window, and we dwell upon our consciousness upon the window itself, then we just go through life in a mundane way, and there's no grace or guilt in that. It just is. But if we raise our consciousness to the heavenly light, the sun, the source, then that source, and in the allegory of the sun, shines through that window and illuminates it. And the personality becomes greater and shines. And if we imagine this to be in a building, it illuminates the cathedral. And to me, this is the purpose of initiation, to raise our consciousness to the awareness of that divinity that illuminates the stained glass window. And in the age of this age of Aquarius, we have this idea of the rights of the individual. Any Aquarians here will know that this "I'm okay, you're okay," and don't push your paradigm on me. But this creates a sort of a bit of a question mark. Well, how can you be an individual and yet belong to the collective as the Aquarian, the group? Well, the group is, of course, when the consciousness realizes that we're all one, and our consciousness and awareness is in that solar light. And yet we all contribute to the collective in our own way. We shine as our authentic self with a vehicle which we are traveling in. So what I look at now is the stellar magic, which we come to. And when we look at each sign of the zodiac, the first 6 signs of the zodiac illustrate this ego consciousness, the mundane consciousness' journey through life. So we have Aries, the baby, the newborn ego. Here I am. Look at me. You know, I'm here. And you'll recognize these traits that we all display according to our own particular sign. So Aries, the newborn ego. Here I am, fresh in the world. Taurus, taking possession of the physical body, the senses, touch, taste, smell, anything to do with its physicality, the body. Gemini, the ego starts to communicate, learning, the naming of the environment and the growing into adolescence. communication. There is something else in the world besides me. Then we have Cancer, which is where the ego establishes its own environment with the home and the family. We have then Leo, the center of one's established kingdom, the middle of life, the sun. Virgo, the assessment of what has been sown, the value of it all, the healing and health, and making the perfection of one's journey and one's achievements. The next sign, and this is this is the first half of the zodiac, from the first house to the sixth house, which is the ego's journey in the world. And of course, in the mundane world, things evolve in a more complex way, but we're talking about our esoteric background of the signs. And we now come to Libra. And this is the start of the ego consciousness becoming greater than itself, the judgment. So Libra is the meeting of the other, the not self, the truth, balanced against life's journey in the judgment hall of Osiris, the arrival at the gates of death. So this is the balance of the ego consciousness and the potential of the greater consciousness. And this is really important in stellar magic, which we'll expand on. So Libra, then Scorpio, the gates of death, the death of the ego that has carried the soul on its life journey. And if we think of Scorpio, where we have the idea of the eagle and the scorpion, at that time, the reason people say, oh my gosh, Scorpio's stung me, it's natural, because as the ego consciousness creates a paradigm, we all create a paradigm for security of who we think we are. And this is the ego consciousness. But Scorpio says, well, actually, there's part of you that's greater. And they have the natural ability to pop your bubble, and this is why, ouch, that hurt, because it's rocking our concept of what our ego tells us we are, which is then preparing the way to release the spiritual self, the seed held within the fruit. This is the Sagittarius period, where after the death of the ego, Sagittarius is the liberated spirit into the spiritual consciousness. It's also the sign, and that is why Sagittarius is the sign of religion, philosophy, the law. And in this manuscript that we're talking about, it states love is the law. And so you get in the Sagittarians the idea of freedom, of liberation, anything's possible. Also the sign of the teacher. So after the death of the ego and the release of the soul into the spiritual realms, then there is a learning and a comprehension which takes place. And then the next sign is, we come to Capricorn, the rebirth of the sun at the winter solstice. The light of the soul, clothed in form, initiated, pure from the knowledge of the spiritual realms. So we're talking in esoteric terms. This is an initiatory process, which I'm going to hand over to Cath shortly to expand on. And so this is the rebirth, and this is why we have the Christmas celebration and so on, the return of the sun god. And it is the light within. But it's in esoteric terms, It is the initiated spirit taking form again in the world. Then we have Aquarius, the knowledge, bringing the knowledge of the stars poured out into the world, that all is complete in its own right. And so this is where, like I alluded to earlier, where you have the Aquarian, I'm okay, you're okay, but we all work together. So Aquarius is now in an initiated consciousness, is the illuminated soul contributing to the world. And then, of course, the next sign, Pisces, unconditional love with that knowledge that we're all one, and service to humanity and all of creation and life itself. And so when we're looking at the passage of the zodiac signs in stellar magic, there are times, which I'd like to, I've come back to state that in the Western mind, that there's a great schism that's taken place, and to become dominant in the world culture, that humanity is somehow separate from existence, from creation, and that humanity is exclusively conscious and all else is inert. This is the great lie and the great schism, where everything is consciousness. And astrology shows that the path to heal this great schism, and demonstrates that humanity is an expression of an all-embracing consciousness in existence and present in all of creation. And this is the purpose of stellar magic. And what I would like to say before, as I just hand over to Cath. So if we look at these astrological archetypes, they are in a continuous play in the manifest of the world from moment to moment as life unfolds. And I'd like to paraphrase the Bard, where he says, there are tides in the affairs of man that taken at the flood lead to great things. And this is the foundation of stellar magic. And I'm going to graciously hand over to you, Cath, if you'd like to take it from here, because Cath will explain the most important things, I believe, hey, Cath, about those 4 initiatory signs. So with no further ado, Cath, I hand it to you.
Thank you. Yes, it was studying this new alphabet, these new numbers, adding the values up of different words, finding words of the same value, and realizing that the words of the same value did indeed link together. They did have some correspondence, and that's where we started. And we added up the values of the planetary names and zodiac signs and all the words in the Book of the Law. And we did an enormous amount of work with calculators and bits of paper. And we came down to the conjunction of the Sun and Venus as being a particularly worthwhile astrological configuration, and worthwhile in terms of ritualizing and generally experimenting with, because Sun plus Venus adds to 107 by this enumeration, and 107 is a bit of a number. Here's some 107s for you. The old magical virtues, which I'm sure we're all familiar with: to know, to dare, to will, and to keep silence. Know, dare, and will added together make 107, which is the value of Sun Venus. Silence itself adds to 107. And the word magician adds to 107. And all this made us think, if we celebrate the conjunction of the Sun and Venus, we should achieve some illumination. Something should happen. So we did. To cut a long story short, we found when the conjunctions take place, and we organised rituals, and we suffered accordingly. And with a great deal of experimentation, we came to realise that what we were experiencing was this sequence of Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn. Libra being the judgment stage, Scorpio being the death stage, Sagittarius being a stage of transformation, and Capricorn being a stage of resurrection. And these 4 zodiac signs add up to 418, which is a significant number in the text of the Book of the Law. It's actually mentioned 418 in the text of the Book of the Law. So we thought, well, this has got to be important. And we carried on experimenting and suffering accordingly. And what else have I got here? Oh, this is where we got to after we'd studied the value of Scorpio extensively. Scorpio adds to 93, which is another significant number. It's the value of nature, and it's the value of time, and it's the value of mother, and it's the value of virgin. All these ideas, concepts, archetypes have the value 93. So they all have a correspondence with Scorpio, which is the sign of death. So Scorpio is a remarkably busy sign, magically speaking. And with it adding to time and mother, and with Jesus having the same value as life, and with God having the same value as now, like this moment, we found that we had a nice little trinity, life, time, now. Jesus, mother, and God. Or Jesus, virgin, and God. His mother and virgin both add to 93. And I've done my best to sort of illustrate this here very simply. So we found this trinity, and then we added here as a location, lifetime now and here, and that's quite an interesting thing to explore. So at the moment of creation, there must have been life there to observe the event. According to quantum theory, nothing happens until there's something there to observe it. Everything remains in a state of potential. So life must have been present at the moment of creation. The moment of creation must have been a now moment. And from then, time began. So lifetime now, and of course here, which is the location of the beginning of creation, which is happening now, and now, and now, happening all the time. So that's that bit. And then after that, this is an example of an English Kabbalistic method called counting well, where you take two words and mash them together and find out what the essence of their combination is. So you take the value of a word and multiply that value by the number of letters in the other word. And then you take the value of the other word and multiply that by the number of letters in the word you first thought of, and then you add those two together and see what the result is. And here we have Jesus Christ counted well. Jesus adds to 68, and there are 6 letters in Christ. So 68 times 6 is 408. Christ has the value 81, multiplied by 5, because there are 5 letters in the word Jesus, and that comes to 405, and the grand total is 813, which is a significant number in, I think, the Greek system. But in the English Qaballa, it's the value, it's the sum total of all the planets. And when I first met Shane and we talked about doing this presentation, Shane said, what you've got to do is explain why it's relevant. This is why it's relevant. This is why it's relevant to all occultists, everybody, Wiccans and grimoire specialists, and everybody in between, to know, to dare, to will, and to keep silence. It's all indicating Sun, Venus. Sun, Venus, the conjunctions of the Sun and Venus form a pentagram. There are nice little animations available, and you can find them on Google and other search engines on the internet. As they go around and form their conjunctions, they make a pentagram over the Earth every 8 years. So if you mark one of the conjunctions with a ritual and identify the Sun conjunct Venus in your own personal sphere, what you're actually doing is identifying the Lord and Lady of the cosmos, the Sun being king, obviously, and Venus being empress, the top goddess. It's the alchemical wedding, male and female, joined in perfect harmony. So if you invoke that into your personal space, then it's going to do certain things afterwards. And it may well turn you into a magician eventually if you learn to keep silence. But this is what it'll do to you. It'll make you judge yourself. And then it'll wipe out some portion of you. It'll destroy some ideas that you have. Because we're not by any means suitable when we start out on this adventure to receive any kind of truth, any kind of divine light. We're carrying too much detritus, as it were. So we have to be cleaned out. We're like an old pot. We have to be washed and scraped. Or you could say we're like a piece of metal. We have to be heated and forged and banged on the anvil until we're in the right shape. And then after that, we are transformed in Sagittarius, which is a peculiar period. Sagittarius being half man, half beast. We don't really know whether we're gods or animals. But we keep blundering along. There's a dark night of the soul condition. And then eventually the light begins to dawn again in Capricorn as the sun hits the solstice and the days start to get longer again. It all fits in together. And this is also the crucifixion myth here. This is obviously the judgment, crucifixion. This is the 3 days in the tomb. Nobody knows what happens there. And then after that comes the resurrection. And to some degree or other, you go through these 4 distinct stages. And you probably do it several times. But that is the magical journey. And it doesn't really matter what system you're working. That's the magical journey. That's the kind of experience, sequence of experiences you can expect to have. Those of you who have been through these sorts of experiences will know what I'm talking about. Those of you who haven't will probably think I'm talking a bit exaggerating somewhat, and believe me, I'm not. So that's our nice little Trinity quartet. It's good fun to attribute these to the 418 Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn, if you like doing that sort of thing, and if you've got the time. And I'm sure I had something else to say, but I've lost it. So this is Jesus Christ counted well, which is 813. Ararita, I think, is the word that adds to 813 in its own Qaballa. But this is English Qaballa. It's not Hebrew Qaballa, more Greek Qaballa, or any other Qaballa. This is English Qaballa. This is gematria for the modern age. And this is what you get if you count well the 2 words I am, which is one of the most significant things anybody can ever say. I am. I am, I believe, comes before I think. So I is 23 and am is 22. You get multiply I by 2 because there's 2 letters in the word am, you get 46. There's only the 1 letter in I, so 22. 46 and 22 is 68, which is the value of Jesus, as already mentioned. So the pure essence of I am is Jesus. You can all stick that in your pipes and smoke it, and I'm going to hand back to Barry.
Thanks, Cath. Yes, and this actually blew me away when we apply the numerical values to the planets, for instance, and to put on an example of this is Venus. The value of Venus added to the value of Neptune adds to, what was it, Cath? 286, I think it was.
No, it's not 286, it's 2. Oh, Lordy me, now you've thrown me a real curve.
Sorry, folks. Anyway,
216.
Pardon? 216.
Yeah, 216.
Yeah. So Neptune and Venus conjunction. So we're looking at astrology now. A conjunction of Venus and Neptune adds up to that value, and it tells us what the essence of that archetypal conjunction is, and that number is the same value mentioned in the manuscript. The eyes of Jesus adds up to the same value. So anyone who is familiar with astrology will realize that Neptune-Venus conjunction interpretation of that is sublime beauty. So anybody with that conjunction, or Neptune in aspect with Venus, a strong aspect together in their charts, will have the gift of being able to see sublime beauty. but having the same value as the eyes of Jesus. To see sublime beauty is to see life through love. And so that's that one example of coming to an understanding by using English Qaballa, the numerical system, to illuminate the meanings of the archetypal planets. Now, when we, and Cath elaborated this in her book, she's done 5 volumes now. I mean, it's far too much for us to go into, but I'll just show you the two that are particularly relevant is Stellar Magic and House 418, which discusses the initiatory of those 4 zodiac signs. So every month, the moon goes through the 12 zodiac signs. And for 2.5 days of every month, the moon goes from 15 degrees of Libra to 15 degrees of Scorpio. And this is the start of that initiatory period of the death of the ego consciousness, or the judgment first, of in the judgment hall of Osiris, the death of the ego, and then the liberated spirit, and then the returning to earth of the initiated spirit. And if we use the Buddhist term, for instance, what did you do before enlightenment? You know, chopped wood, carried water. What did you do after enlightenment? Chopped wood and carried water. But the difference is that to the second half of that statement, one is an illuminated consciousness and aware of one's divinity. And so we have this same principle when we come back to the Capricorn side. Now, if we catch the tide in the affairs of man, i.e. mark those times of the zodiac and stellar influences, every month the moon goes through those 4 initiatory signs with that process. So in to speak in quantum terms, that the flow of time and the universe is in perfect balance, but to observe a point consciously is to create a birth, a new beginning. And so that stasis, then the balance is tipped and a course of action takes place. So to mark by a simple ceremony, like the moon's entry into Libra each month, one confesses and makes a statement of what one thinks of oneself, one's ego consciousness. Who am I? What have I done? What have I achieved? My assessment of myself. Then the next that will happen at 15 degrees of Libra. So one marks that time, and that sets in the ego consciousness, a birth, an idea, a process. And then we mark the moon's entry into Scorpio, the house of death, the tomb. Then we mark Sagittarius. What is happening? The learning, the spiritual self, the liberated spirit. And then we mark Capricorn. This is over a period of about 4 days of those 4 signs. 4 or 5 days it takes. But it's a simple marking. It's the elegance of this is that it's so relevant now for the age that we're in, that anyone can by marking this time and doing this each month from the beginning, the first month that we do this is Easter. And it is no coincidence that the Christian church marks Easter. It's the first full moon after Lent, I believe.
After the spring equinox.
The spring equinox. So this is why Easter moves slightly each year. And that makes sure that Easter always falls with a moon in what is known as the Via Combusta, or the burning way, which is 15 of Libra to 15 of Scorpio. It is an initiatory time. The death of the ego, the man on the cross of matter, the confinement in the tomb, and the resurrection on the third day of the illuminated consciousness, the divine. So this happens every month. So if, as individuals and initiates on the path mark these times, we will invoke this process within ourselves. Well, having done this for all of Cath has done it, and Jim Lees have experimented over the last 40 years with this process. And I conducted it last year myself, and was very, very fascinated by the results formed and certain ideas that came from this, because one does this process every month. And if we go back to my original statement about the ego's journey through the zodiac from Aries to Libra, Aries, we do this initiation. Aries governs the head and the intellect and the child. Then the senses, and then the communication, then the home and the establishment. So if we mark each month in accordance with the nature of the sun's position, whether it be in its zodiac sign, in the confession of the Libra, we say, you know, I say in Leo, I have turned away from God. I have been proud and self-centered, and so on. We name those qualities without grace or guilt. It's a statement, like an audit that we do. And we do this for each, so we, through that, the sequence of the 6 months leading to the sun in Libra, those 6 months, we are setting an initiatory process for every component of our ego consciousness in preparation for when the sun enters Libra in October. And we take that point then where we address a ceremony to the sun's progress through the 4 initiatory signs. Now, it's very relevant to this present day, because this 418 process is also being manifest in the world. When we've seen Pluto, which represents the soul's journey, the spirit. When I say the soul goes into the parking lot and chooses a vehicle, it's the eternal spirit that's connected with the divine, but it's also the collective of humanity. And in this since the 1980s, Pluto has gone through those 4 signs of initiation. And it's just it just went briefly into Aquarius. So it came out of the Capricorn sign and it's just nipped back into Capricorn. But we've seen the results of this in the world, where the old order, the old paradigm has been breaking down in the world. It is no longer relevant. Space must be made for the new consciousness coming in, which we will see in the Pluto's entry into Aquarius. So not only have we seen this in the world happening, but also we've seen it in individuals. And I'm sure many of us have been mentors for friends and so on who've been confronted with their fears and their karma over the last 20 years, which is the old paradigm of Capricorn. It's that we have had a portal opened of initiation in the world that has awakened within us a knowledge that the old paradigm no longer serves us and something new must come into place. And this is a process which we're all experiencing now. So what Cath and I are presenting to everyone here and there is a system of initiation that falls onto the very foundations of creation, which is the language of astrology, which was clearly known to the ancients, as we see it as in fragments going through all religions. So it doesn't really matter whether one is a Christian, a Hindu, or whatever faith one has. We're talking about the foundations of esoteric principles, which is the law of the universe. And this key came through the discovery of the English Qaballa as applied to that manuscript, the Book of the Law, which states in it, love is the law. And it was rather interesting. I was talking to Cath. She was asked a question, at what point did you have an epiphany concerning this? And Cath, well, I'll hand to you, Cath. We discussed this earlier. Perhaps you'd like to share that.
Well, it was when we when we did the I am counted well calculation, and we realised that I am counted well has the same value as Jesus. And so many things clicked into place when that came through. The whole theory of the 418 had been in position, tried and tested as well as we could for 20 years. And suddenly we could see how to ritualize it and how the things should be done, and how to take the candidate from identifying with the moon through to identifying with the sun, and following the sun from the judgment at the autumn equinox through the house of death in Scorpio, when the sun enters Scorpio. That's when all the festivals of the dead occur, while the sun is in Scorpio. We have Halloween, and there's Santa Muerte in South America, and all the festivals of the dead happen then. And through Sagittarius to the 21st of December, when, quite apart from it being Christmas and the birth of the Saviour, you come to the end of the 418 and the light begins to rise again. And you have this sort of, it's like a golden dawn experience.
Yeah.
When you get there. Yeah.
And so what I can share there, I know I'd left New England and came to New Zealand and have been here for 20 years. And so over that period, I lost a certain amount of contact with Jim and Cath and so on, and their researchers. And I came back to this recently. And when we did a bit of, of cross-referencing, I happened to be at a past life workshop, at the same time as Cath and Jim came across this Jesus is life and change. And obviously I had been initiated as a founder member of that group in 1976 and so on. So once one is initiated, one does have a psychic link. Well, at this past life workshop, I had the most amazing experience of the compassion of Christ coursing through my body, which we would call Christ consciousness, and the infinite compassion thereof that extends to the world. And this energy flowed through with such intensity that the various other people who were in the workshop in the room, some collapsed crying, some fell over, and when the practitioner brought me back into normal consciousness, there was rather a stunned silence, because it was quite profound, to say the least. And when Cath and I crossed references in time, it coincided with this epiphany. Yes, and so really, all I can say, and one can only speak from one's own personal experience, this seems to be an initiatory process that damn well works and raises one's awareness to one's inner divinity, and one puts oneself into a space where one is still the stained glass window, but authentically aware of the divinity within. And I've shared this with a couple of dear friends of mine who came in on last year. We did this process and found that we all have been experiencing the similar thing, that there is a connection made between one's mundane consciousness and what one speaks. One speaks with truth and speaks from the heart in such a manner that you go, where did that come from? Where did that statement come from? Where did that conversation that I've just shared come from? And it has a particular pure quality. Would you not agree, Cath?
Definitely, yes.
So it would appear that the initiatory process does form this link, but in accordance with where the individual is on their own particular path. And my intention this year is to go deeper, and I've already started at Easter this year to do the same process again, and see what the next level is, and how deep it will take me. Cath, to you.
I did it 7 years in a row before I thought that's enough. And then I did 3 more years just to be sure. And there's a line in the Book of the Law which says, the consciousness of the continuity of existence. And that is what you get. That's the alteration in consciousness that you achieve. The consciousness of the continuity of existence. And it is a blissful, joyous state to be in. It's like the enlightenment that the Buddhists describe. And it's like the Christ consciousness that the Christian mystics and Gnostic folk describe. And it's like the higher visions on the tree of life that the Hebrew Kabbalists describe, the vision of truth. And it works. It works, and it's completely non-denominational. You don't. It's not necessary to believe in God at all. It'll sort that out for you. It'll show you what God is and what your relationship with God is, in no uncertain terms. Not that you could explain it to anybody else once you've seen it and been there, but other people who have seen it and been there will recognize it in you, and you will recognize it in other people. I met up with a chap who did the original experimental run with the 418. We Jim and I launched it with a little team of experimental ritualists to see what would happen. And they wrote their records down every month, and we made notes and proceeded very carefully. And we got through to the end and we said, wow, that was fantastic, let's do it again. And I met up with a bloke who'd done that original experiment some years later. And I recognized him across the street at a distance because he was bigger than everybody else. He had a solidity about him that nobody else had. And he said the same about me. You get your feet more firmly on the ground than other people, because identifying with first the moon and then the sun. You got the sun and the moon in you anyway from your astrological talismanic nature that you are, as Barry described earlier. And they respond. They switch on and come into harmony with the actual objective sun and the actual objective moon that we can all see in the sky. And you realize where you belong in the cosmos and why you belong where you belong in the cosmos. And it it doesn't require any prior faith. And what it does confer is certainty, a level of certainty, rather than a level of faith, which would just be you believing me when I say this is what it does. When you do it and you get there, then you know, and it's a certainty. And you can say, yeah, she was right. But it didn't quite happen like that for me, because it never does. Everybody has their own individual experiences. But the basic framework is always this basic framework of initiation. This formula, like baking a cake. You weigh out the ingredients, you mix them up together and destroy their individualities. You put them in the oven where you don't know what happens, I don't know what happens. And then you've got a delicious cake at the end of it all. Somehow.
I think there's, Cath, there's some, and what happened when we first, when Jim first got the English Qaballa, there was so much to go through, to understand, and to research in the manner we've described, that we said, well, right, let's just send it out to the world. You know, Jim said, well, we'll just send it to everybody, and then everybody can make of it what they will, you know, and do the thing. And so, and there are various groups and so on around the world that have picked it up and gone down their own paths. Yeah, and put it down again, and have gone their own paths with it, you know. And it is that, and some of them have gone into the woods, I think possibly would be a description, where when the truth is so simple. And love is the law.
Yes.
And there's the most beautiful things that keep popping out. The supreme divinity is the infinite goddess. And we often hear in this time that we're now coming into the divine feminine, being made known, which in the her name goes by Nuit in the Egyptian system, the sky goddess, the infinite space. And in the text, there's statements that pop out, and you go, "Oh my gosh!" You're like, the goddess states, as it were, in the manuscript, "My joy is to see your joy." Yeah. Bend upon them as you lidded woman, hands not touching the earth and not hurting so much as a little flower. Well, heaven does do that. Heaven touches the earth. There's no gap between the earth and heaven. Yeah. And the statement, all the sorrows are but as shadows, they pass and are done.
But there is that which remains.
Thank you. Yeah. And to live in the consciousness of the continuity of existence, which is another way of being in the eternal now.
Yes,
which is the awareness of the here, the time now. Yeah.
You can't live in it because you still got to do the shopping.
Yeah.
But you know
Absolutely,
it's there.
yeah.
You know it's there. It's like the back of your head is there.
Yeah. We chop wood. Yeah. Chop wood and carry water.
Yeah, but you talk to the wood and the water talks to you.
Indeed.
You know.
So what do you think, Cath? Do you think we've shared?
I think we're probably going to start rambling.
I think we probably are. So
and just saying wise things to each other.
I think so, darling. Yeah.
There is one mind in the universe. So yes. I think we better stop and see if anybody's got any questions.
Yes.
Cath, yeah, 1 second, please. I'd just like to say a huge thank you, first of all, to both of you. That was fascinating and beautifully and eloquently delivered. So thank you very much. Kristen, please go ahead.
Yes, I would love to see, Cath, if I could, that first image again of the letters and their numbers. Thank you.
No, you know, dear.
Thank you.
It's every 11th letter of the regular alphabet.
So write out A, B, C, D, E, F, A, etc. Then just write down the letter A, and then go after that. You go 1, 2, 3, 4. Count 11 letters beyond, which will be L. And you put that becomes 2, and then you go the next one. Then you count 11 letters from L, and then put that comes to W, and that'll be 3. And so on.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Make it easier.
Yeah, I'm going to say. I mean, we're not doing a promotion here, but Cath put it on. Fortunately, when Jim passed away a few years ago, and Cath said, "What am I going to do with all these manuscripts and stuff and writings?" And the answer came, well, write it down and publish it. Yeah. So there's a lot more. We've just touched on it, really, haven't we, Cath? So
we have.
If anyone's interested, you can elaborate a bit further.
At the moment, all the books about EQ are from Hadean Press in West Yorkshire in the UK. There was a book written by Jake Stratton Kent, the late Jake Stratton Kent, called The Serpent Tongue. which is very good and worth buying. And there isn't anything, nobody else has written anything yet. I keep hoping that somebody will. I think I've got one more book which will be out next year. And then I think I've done my bit. But Hadean Press, if you're interested in this, if you want to purchase any of these books.
Yes, and the order and value is there, Kirsten, in you know, for reference. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Kristen. I'd like to hand over to Benny now, please.
Hello, and thank you for a very interesting and also a very fascinating presentation. I think there's a lot to think about. But one thing that was surprising for me to hear is that it seems that you are basing your whole system on the book of the law, Revelation, you know, for Aleister Crowley, you know, as you explained in Egypt. But the fact is that if you have some contact with the followers of Aleister Crowley, you know, the so-called Thelemites, they are normally quite hostile towards Jesus, and they believe that the time we are living in is a kind of a time when we are leaving this Christian era and goes into another era of horrors. And therefore, I'm quite surprised that you put so much emphasis on Jesus and linked the book of the law to Jesus, because in my view, you know, it's difficult for me to see the connection.
Yes. Well, his name is mentioned in the book of the law, and it must be there for a reason. If the book of the law is indeed a holy book. That's the first point. If you apply English Qaballa to the letters of the name Jesus, you get the value 68, which is the value of life. So Jesus is life, your life, my life, all the life that is wriggling about in the space in between you and me and everywhere else. All that life is Jesus. And so that's why we emphasize Jesus, not because we're Thelemites, because we're not because we're followers of Crowley, because we're not. It's a different system. It's a different way of looking at things altogether. And it enables us to take a fresh look at words which mean specific things, like the name Jesus has a whole lot of baggage along with it. And a lot of people find it very, very discouraging. So to be able to leave all that on one side and just look at the numerical value and the numerical correspondences and start there, and then have a look at the stories, the myths, and see what fits and what doesn't. Jesus is life. Jesus is supposed to be merciful and forgiving. Yeah, life should be merciful and forgiving, ideally, don't you think?
I agree.
Yeah. But we're not. We regard Crowley as a rather fortunate or unfortunate postman. He delivered the message, but he never got to read it. Poor man. You know,
I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was rather significant that that he never did. He knew he got something, but he never did. Was able to understand the key, and in his own words, the being or the entity that dictated it to him. He was instructed by his wife that it came through Rose first, and said, and she told him, this is what you've got to do. You have to be the scribe. Yeah. So what it has illuminated is these sort of stellar conditions, what we've shared with you people. And certainly, like Cath said, the Christ consciousness is where all virtue stems from. You know, once we're aware of that we are all one and all is love, how can we not be of service to humanity? And as we know, in the Christian church, look at the centuries of misinterpretation and dogma that caused great suffering. So but the message itself was ignored. And so this is, we're not part of, to use a terminology, Crowleyanity at all. This is something quite separate.
Yeah.
Did you write a kind of commentary on the Book of the Law?
No.
Because it's quite a cryptic text if you read it, you know, and I think it would be very nice to have a kind of a commentary on the text.
It would take me the rest of my life to write a commentary on the first word, had. Had has the value of 11, which is a significant number, and away you go. You know.
Yeah, might I say that? Yeah.
That's the manifestation of Nuit, the great goddess, and away you go again. You know, I couldn't do it. I haven't got that kind of talent or anything that I would need to do that. That's for somebody else can do that. Jim discovered the key, and I put Jim's works into the public domain, and now it's for other people to pick it up and work with it.
Thank you, Benny. I'd like to comment, please, if I may, to attempt a commentary on such a script would be a very lengthy intellectual process. And the thing that I really appreciated about something that Cath said toward the latter part of the presentation was that when she encountered one of the people who were the original ritual experimenters who'd been through the process they were describing, and she saw him, that he was very solid and very present and grounded, and that was also his experience of seeing her. My feeling is that on this subject matter, it would be all too easy to kind of drift away into the realms of the imaginings, the imagination.
Yes.
Whereas what you're describing, which for me is a really, really strong indicator that there's something really valid and valuable and important about what the work you're describing, is that the end result is a solidification, an embodiment of an understanding. And it's not an intellectual thing. It's something which becomes felt and embodied.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I believe that's much more valuable in the world rather than stimulation of the intellect, because the intellect likes to think itself superior all too often to the body and to the inner senses.
It's so surprising that the Kabbalists make so much of it. They ought to see that Hod is a long way down the tree of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Alex and all the people at the Atlantis bookstore in London, over to you, please.
You want me to go first?
I know. I don't mind.
Allow all the people here to go.
Does anyone have a
I've
question?
got loads of questions.
I do have a
Anybody?
question. I have a question.
Get in there first.
It was well, first of all, I mean, it must have been absolutely incredible to discover this. It just must have been, you know, not mind-blowing, soul-blowing. It just must have been absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just a very, very simple question. It was is there some reason, or, you know, when you're talking about, say, the 418 of in traditional gematria of reducing it down further, so 418 would go to 13, which would go to 4, or was there something that you discovered within this English system that kept it at the 418, or?
We call it the 418 because that's the value of the 4 zodiac signs: Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn. But we do those sorts of gematria moves, if I can say that, as well. We would reduce the numbers down to 4 for examination and to see where it goes.
And when do we all sign up for next Easter's version?
Well, yeah. Look to see when Easter is. Easter is always timed for the first full moon after the spring equinox, and because the spring equinox is Sun going into Aries, and the full moon is Moon opposite Sun, and Libra, Scorpio are the signs opposite to Aries and Taurus. So when the Sun is going through Aries or Taurus, which are the springtime solar signs, the full moon being opposite the Sun will be in Libra or Scorpio. So when you find the date of Easter, you'll know roughly when the first Libra Scorpio is, and then set off from there. We recommend you spend the first 3 months doing just meditations on the moon, going through the house of judgment and through the death experience and what happens next, before you start doing the rituals, so that your psyche is in some way prepared for what's going to happen next.
Right, thank you. I'm sure there's plenty of other questions. And Alistair, Mario, do you have one? Yes.
I got a slightly awkward question, but it's I'm thinking English spelling has changed quite a bit over the last few hundred years. So creating an English Qaballa, when are you fixing those spellings, or are you linking that somehow to a kind of zeitgeist manifestation? So I guess if you look at the Hebrew Qaballa, those emanations for the original creation. So are you linking this to a zeitgeist thing now? This is how we spell words now, and therefore the gematria is linked to significations right now, or what?
That's a very good question, and you have to take into account the way Americans use the language as well when you're discussing spellings of words. We generally take the spellings as they were in 1904 to be the ones that would have been chosen by whatever it was that chose to dictate the Book of the Law in the first place. The ones that would have been familiar to Crowley. But we would calculate the values of words with different spellings just to find out what the difference is. And words translated from other languages as well, like the name Hecate, which has got 3 spellings at the last count. And she comes up with some interesting values. I prefer to spell her with a K. And then you get the value of circle and master, corresponding with the value of Hecate spelt with a K, which I think is quite neat. But yeah, it's a personal choice. There aren't, as the comment says, the comment to the Book of the Law, each for himself. It's not, there aren't any hard and fast rules, except for the rules which are already there, which you find out as you go along.
I find that as well, because I'm not a great gematria person, but I am, an esoteric astrologer person, and I'm very interested in the core meaning of the archetypes. That's where I come from, and so one doesn't have to be a great numerologist or whatever. It's the astrological formula that is the initiatory process, which wherever one comes from, one can mark those astrological times and produce the effect. And what you mentioned, Shane, about the embodiment, one can, speaking from my own experience, I've got three planets, Moon, Mercury, and Mars, all in Capricorn, which grounds my Sagittarius gregariousness and says, well, it doesn't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. So does it come up with the goods, the grounding, and which it has to be to be effective in the world, because this is where life plays out. And so yes, by all means, verify the interest by the numerology of the English Qaballa, but bear in mind that it's given as a key of initiation based on our link and our soul of creation, that we are one with humanity and the stars.
Thank you very much. Whilst anyone here, Alice, you've got a quick one. Oh, yes. Oh, hold on.
I wonder if you could just define the difference between like a cipher or a system of gematria and a Qaballa. Like if there is a difference between just like having a number code for the English alphabet and that allowing us to calculate corresponding values, and whether that's a different thing to a Qaballa as a sort of like phonetic system, complete system.
So as far as definitions of the words go, I'm not quite sure how to answer you. That's Rob, isn't it? Yeah. Good afternoon, young fella. Well, Qaballa, as far as I know, means something like received wisdom or received message or received, in the sense of being on the other end of the transmission. I'm not a Hebrew Kabbalist, so if anybody knows a better translation of the word Qaballa, please jump in. And so when Jim got this key, he christened this alphabetical sequence English Qaballa because it was a received
transmission.
Yeah. It wasn't. It was something that came to him. He didn't. And it's actually there in the Book of the Law itself, which is a bit cheeky. I'll find you the reference. And gematria just means applying numbers to letters and applying mathematics to language, which anybody can do anywhere. And you can do A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, D equals 4. And the best of luck, you'll get something. But you're very unlikely to get anything consistent, which will relate to astrology and to quantum physics and to the biblical creation myth and North American Indian folklore all at once, because all of these things can be expressed in English. So all of these things are capable of rendering an English Kabbalistic value, and then you can look at the correspondences. But I'm sorry, Rob. I'm not quite sure how to answer your question. I'm sure it's a very good question.
Yes, Alistair.
Yeah, Barry and Cath, thank you very much for what you put in. It's very natural, your presentation, the content was fantastic. And humbly, I say I can see the insight that you've got from this practice. And I absolutely love, Barry, your interpretation of what an initiation is all about. There are so many, and having been through so many, everything you said makes sense. But at the end of the day, it's you finding that deity within you. I think both in the Bible and in the Hindu texts, they say at some time in your life, you will look in the mirror and you will see the highest deity that you can. And only those people who've got to that point will recognize who they see. But the three questions I have, the first one is about Crowley, the second about astrology, and the third about your cipher. So here we go. First question, tongue in cheek. Could Alex Crowley have been asked to look in the mirror, look out of the window, and his wife as a medium use a different voice and dictate the book of the Lord to him, which would be a reality of what mediums do, what scribes do in a situation as it was? Second question, I've always wanted to know how astrologers have been able to superimpose the length of time that a moon phases, bearing in mind the ecliptical path it has, with the sort of 365.4 days of the solar eclipse. So I'd love to know how astrologers work those figures out, Barry. And finally, the cipher 11 is that cipher that Freemasons have used, and that comes from the 22 letters of the alphabet. I'm not trying to belittle anything about what has happened, because you're using the English language, which has letters that both the Masonic cipher and the Jewish cipher don't use, I and J and some of the other letters. But I'm just saying the number 11 is significant, and it compares directly with the Jewish, which doesn't surprise me in that your English Qaballa works for you, but is related to the ancient languages anyway. But it was a kind of question. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll take the last one, if I may, first. And say, yeah, it's exactly what you would expect. Yeah. If it is a true system, if it has any reflection of the truth with a capital T in it, and if these other systems are also receptacles of the same truth, then you should see similarities.
Right.
So it's really not surprising. It's exactly what you would expect. In fact, it's a confirmation of English Qaballa as something a bit out of the ordinary, let's say. And for the first question, we're proposing that Rose told Crowley to go and sit down, and then she became possessed, presumably, and wandered in behind him and said, "Don't turn round, darling, but I'm about to dictate this manuscript to you." kind of thing. Maybe Crowley didn't write very much about the episode, and what is known about the episode is very, very little. And I personally am not prepared to make a judgment either way, but I would like to show you this, which is sheet 16 from the third day's writing, which has on it a grid marked, letters along the top and numbers down the side in Crowley's writing, and this grid of squares marked all over the page. So why did he write across that? What was that doing in his notebook? What was that doing in his notebook, and why did he write across it? Well, that grid, if you follow the letters along the top, if you run the alphabet downwards instead of along the top, and then look along the diagonal line, you find You've got your ALW sequence.
Can you just pull that back a little from the camera and slightly to your left, please?
I'm doing my best to see what I'm doing and failing
Yeah,
miserably.
that's great.
Can you see that? The EQ is done in red over the manuscript page. Crowley drew this diagonal line and said this line drawn is a key. That's in the text. And so what's that all about? And that wasn't anything that Crowley did on purpose, and that wasn't anything that Rose could have done either. But there it is. It's one of those proofs that everything is linked to everything else.
Oh, thank you. Barry,
I can't remember what your middle question, the astrological
Yes,
one.
I'd like, could you say the middle question
Barry,
again,
really.
please? Yeah.
Would you like me to repeat it? Sorry, Barry.
Yes, please, yes.
Oh, yeah, so I've always wanted to know how astrologers have been able to calculate the different lengths of a moon cycle, because it's an elliptical cycle, and the length of a moon month, a lunar month, varies considerably, on top of a solar cycle, which is a little bit more regular, being 365.4. It's just, how do you work out the lunar length of days when it varies so often?
Oh.
Goodness. Now that is a highly technical question for an intuitive astrologer.
Okay. Sorry, Barry, I had assumed. I do apologize.
Yeah. I refer you
I don't
to
know the
Raphael's
answer.
memory.
I was genuinely asking. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I wish I could answer that question, but I'm afraid I have my limitations when it comes down to technical detail, I'm very grateful for Raphael's ephemeris and the modern computer age.
No, I wasn't trying to trick anybody. I genuinely wanted to know the answer.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to be able to answer it to that question for you. But no, I used to in the early days before computers, I used to calculate the the chart, directly from the longitudes and latitudes and so on. But nowadays, I'm fortunate enough to have a programming that does it for me. I make no claims to be an academic. Yeah.
It sounds to me it's a little similar to the problem of squaring the circle.
So Sheen, thank you very much from the bookshop. I'm sure Hasu's had his electronic hand up for a very long time. So
yes, indeed. Over to you, please, Hasu.
Alex, thank you very much for that electronic hand comment. And thank you for that presentation. Barry, Cath, fascinating, because Barry, especially astrology, I come from the Vedic Hindu tradition. So,
yes.
I find it very, very interesting the way you conceived it, because there's very many similarities. And just to sort of maybe partly answer Alistair's question, in the Hindu tradition of astrology, you have a book called the Panchang, which is published every year. Gives you the solar positions, the planets' positions, equinoxes, everything for every day and every hour. So you can calculate which is the most auspicious time to do anything or any occasion or a function if you're reading a chart. So it exists, it's existed for thousands of years, but now it's a printed version, you can get it on the internet. So the Hindu astrologers use that. And nowadays anyone can, you just look at the page, you need to just learn how to interpret it. That's the problem. So if you interpret it the wrong way, you end up doing the negative thing rather than trying to achieve the positive thing. So best left to the experts, as I say. Secondly, which was very interesting as well, what you spoke about, again, with astrology, because astrology is a very unique art. It's, it's been going on for millennia. There's no time when you can put down, yes, this is when it started. Now, from my sort of perspective, from the sort of Vedic Hindu perspective, astrology has played a part in our lives on a daily basis. From the moment I was born, the first thing my father would have done is go to see an astrologer who would have created my birth chart for my whole life as I lived. And then he would have predicted or tried to predict in some way as to what the negative forces would be, what would be the negative energies in my life, based on the time I was born, the day I was born, and the planetary systems. Now, that meant that that chart lives with me forever from the moment it's produced. Now, the interesting thing is, and then there, there's predictions, and you'll be always told that your weakness is a certain planet, i.e., certain planetary energies are going to be disruptive, are going to oppose you. So what then they do is have a particular stone associated with that planet on which they would then create energies to protect you against adverse conditions in the future. Now, the proof of that is always if something that's been predicted happens in the future, if the stone really was done in a way that protected you until the point of the event that was going to happen. I mean, I must say, in my case, it did. And the event happened that was predicted. At the age I was told it would happen. And the circumstances are very unique because the ring that was made for me stayed in a drawer for everything goes in the drawer. No one looks at it. And I was sitting with my father one day, and we were sort of going through all this. And I thought, what's this? He said, oh, this is your little ring that was made for you because you had your planetary positions of Mars were very weak, and you could have problems future as you go in the future. So he said, I should be wearing it. I said, yeah, it's yours. You can do what you. So I put it on my little chain because the fingers had gone a bit more fatter since the days that was made for me. And lo and behold, about a month after I started putting it on, the prediction that was made that I would have a serious accident of some sort, and if I was protected by this ring, I would go through, pass through that, and it happened, a very serious car crash, and I lived through that. So, as you say, astrology, you can believe it or not, but the fundamental is the proof of something happening that's been predicted so long in the past. So in my case, I can say without a doubt, Barry, astrology does work. If you look at it the right way and you look at the thing that those who are predicting know what they're talking about. Now, the other thing as well I sort of found very interesting was, I think it was Benny mentioned Crowley's idea about living this age and going into another. In the Vedas, we are now going to go into the Kali Yuga, the Dark Ages. So that, in a way, again, ties up with that idea that, we are moving away into a very disruptive time and universe. But mainly, I think the main thing is that no matter what anyone say, the predictive nature of what astrology and astronomy does is there, because if you're predicting something, you're looking at the energy forces which are everywhere around, and someone who can understand how these energies flow through, not only through the universe but through our bodies, because each of those flows affects each of our organs. So I think that I'm impressed with your sort of presentation in such a short time, trying to compress astrology into such a small period, but it's excellent, and I really appreciate it. And the last thing I would like to mention as well is when we talk of energy, coming from this background, I always say that the female energy we believe that the female energy is the most powerful. The Western sort of idea of the male, but in the Vedas, if you look at it, nothing exists without the female energy. The male and female have to be equal and equally balanced to create a perfect balanced universe. That was my 5 minutes rant. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you everyone for listening.
I really enjoyed that. I thought that was really good. I'm fascinated by the timeline of your life. Well, from your birth, somebody predicted that you would have this piece of evil astrology in the future, and had this little talisman made to protect you from it. And all these years later, you just turn it up in the drawer and start wearing it. Oh,
I'm still wearing it. At my grand old age of 72, I'm still wearing it.
Just a short period before this terrible thing actually occurs. Synchronicity? Synchronicity spoken here, I like to say.
I think, yes, I'd like to say you spoke there in terms of talismanic magic. By the creation of the ring, the protective talisman, it would have been made under an astrological fortuitous aspect. So it's the ceremonial establishment of embodying a timeline within an object, and you carry that energy with you. And this also comes in under the heading of the stellar magic and the timing, which Cath's written about, in one of the volumes. The Buddhists say poison to medicine in terms of aspects, and one looks at one's own chart. One goes to an astrologer, and I think for me the purpose of the astrologer is to look at where the negatives are and turn poison to medicine. An example of that would be, say, an opposition between Mars and Saturn. I had an example of that recently, where I was explaining that to somebody who had that configuration in their chart very prominently, and they said, they asked me a question, and I started to give the answer, and they said, "Well, can you get to the point?" And which was the Mars wanting to get to the destination, but the Saturn's counter was, it's the journey that's the answer. And so it's explaining to that person that dynamic. It's the journey that's the answer. Take the patience of Saturn to give you the destination that Mars seeks. So it applies to every aspect within a chart. Turn it, and also attention goes, energy goes where attention goes. I personally have a very negatively aspected moon, but I've got a very good aspected sun, which is a Sun conjunct Venus trine Pluto, and if I sit in that, you're 72, they're same age as myself. We're Pluto in Leo generation. So if I live in my Pluto in Leo, which is a good aspect to Venus and the Sun, then life works a lot better for me. But if I identify with the moon in my chart, then it's not so good.
Yes. Well, it's very interesting that, because obviously in my case, my weakness was the planet Mars. And on that basis, the incantations were done and the time to give me that, re-energize everything else and reduce the weakness. And of course, the stone that went with that was a coral, orange coral stone, which you have to be specific about how deep the orange is or how light the orange is. And all this was also done. The astrologer would call you at a certain time, because he wouldn't do it like any time of the day or night. He would invite you to come at a certain time when his energies are good as well, because it's not on him doing this when he's got negative energies in himself, trying to create the positive for you. So it's a very complicated system. I think those, I'm only an amateur. I just read about it, but those who are the experts are much, much more deeper into understanding the whole, because everything is also based on the lunar cycle. So the whole of the Indian system is based on lunar cycles. So, when Cath mentioned the number 11, great significance. Number 11 comes twice in a lunar cycle, and those 2 days are very sacred and very special.
Yes, I think in terms of energy, the birth of anything at a given time holds the energy of that moment.
Yes.
And we know ourselves, if we're in the presence of someone who is extremely negative, we don't feel so good. But if we're in the presence of somebody who is positive, we do feel good. And the same applies when we comprehend that all of creation is conscious. So that talisman that you hold is conscious, and you're holding it in your presence. So therefore, you're in the presence of a positive energy. It's a basis of talismanic.
Yes, and
that all is conscious.
And everything exists, except in our minds, we only are very divisive about what exists and what doesn't exist, because it suits our nature, human nature, to ignore if we can't explain or understand. Thank you very much, Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cath. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hasu. I'd like to make an observation. Earlier, just before we started the meeting, I was saying that for me, there's a saying that I really love, which is the map is not the territory. And people get fixated on maps. They get fixated on, is this, in the theoretical study of astrology, or mathematics, or the whatever the system may be, people get very studious and sometimes very attached to what they believe they know. But those are just systems of thought. They're just they're like the map. It's not the territory itself. And in relation to the fact that the manuscript that became the Book of the Law came through Crowley, but it was dictated to him. It's a little bit like, if you imagine, if one wanted to send a really important letter through the post, the postman that delivers the letter to your door may be an absolute wrong 'un, might be really, really not a good person, not the kind of person you'd want to hang out with. But they wouldn't turn up at your door and then start to try and interpret the contents of the letter that you were receiving. They're just the postman. They just deliver the message. Yes. Then it's up to us to kind of read it and glean an understanding based on our own experience, really. And for me, say for instance, with the Qaballa, what interests me is what I would tend to refer to as the experiential Qaballa. It's a lived experience. We study the nature of the archetypes and correspondences, and the interrelations of those archetypes and correspondences. But really, what brings it alive is personal experience. Yes. And for me, what all of the work that you've done is highly creative, really, really creative and experiential. You put the time and the effort in to do the experimentation and to think, well, what can we do with this? This really interests me. What can we do with this? So there was a comment that was made by Alex in Atlantis Bookstore a little while ago, where he was saying, well, sign me up for the next Easter onward. I feel very, very inclined to engage in an experimental work based upon what you were describing to us today, maybe starting next Easter.
Shane, could we not form a group and
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think that's a very good idea, because then we can make notes, we can cross-reference experiences. And I think that for me, that's very, very creative work done in the now. Well, it will be when we get there, but it'll be in the now. It's experiential.
Wonderful. 3 cheers for Shane and 3 cheers for the gentleman who's
Alex.
Alex. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hooray. This. Do you hear this, Barry? This is a result.
Yes, we would.
I know.
we would
I'm
love to start the
greatly
group.
encouraged, Cath, because I'd be so interested to hear other people's experiences.
Absolutely.
because this is cutting edge. You know,
It
this is
is.
you know, and we don't know, and it's only like you and I and 1 or 2 people we know who have done this, who've cross-referenced and said, wow, we're getting the same results.
Yeah.
So the more people that feed back to us, it's it must get bigger.
It will. And as Dion Fortune more or less said, the more people who tread this path, the easier it will get. Yeah, Dion Fortune used to talk about the veils that had to be got through before you could see this, that, or the other thing. And then actually the veils aren't as thick as they used to be. But they're hardly there at all these days. It's because so many people have been getting through them. And the more people who do this work, the more, I don't want to say easier, the more approachable it will become, the more perhaps attractive, I don't know. But and the idea of you all getting together and making a group effort, that's absolutely marvelous. God, I can almost see Jim smiling.
One of the things we planning to do in the future here at the study group, to give people who attend something a little bit more than just the presentation and just the paper, but is to do some practical work afterwards. And I'd like to openly, on behalf of the MSD, ask if you might like to join us, not every time, but every now and then, to do some practical work for those who are here who would like to do that. Would that be something that we could ask you to do, get involved with?
Yes, I'll share a little thing with you right now if you like.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Okay. It's based on based on this arrangement. You can do it as a Kabbalistic cross. Life, time, now, here. Except I haven't quite got that the right way around because I'm facing the wrong way.
Inscribe the Kabbalistic cross across you. Down. Yes.
Yeah. But the final movement towards the breast is here. So it's sort of life, time, now, here. As an opening or a closing for a ritual. Lifetime,
it's the vibrational sound of the words, the vibrational,
yes.
you know.
You can address the quarters. You can fit them onto the quarters. Now is in the east. So you face east and say, now. And you turn to the south and you say, life. And you turn to the west and you say, time. And then you turn to the north and you say, here. And that's a basis for a ritual right there. You can add your pentagram ritual into that. And instead of invoking the archangels, or in addition to invoking the archangels, you can invoke these four
Qualities.
Archetypal forces, concepts, lifetime now here. You know, you can use that. And it works. I wouldn't share it with you if it didn't work. I'm sorry, I just can't remember the sequence to get it right.
That's great. Thank you very much.
I wrote a pamphlet, which is also available from Hayden Press, called 21st Century Pentagram. And that goes into this in a bit more detail. They're very cheap. I don't stand to gain anything by touting that in front of you all. So they're only a few quid.
Thank you very much, Cath.
I'd like to hand over to Benny, please. Thanks for your patience, Benny.
Thank you. I just want to elaborate a little on my first question about the origin of the Book of the Law. As you rightly said, Jane, it's not the postman who is important, but it's actually the sender. And that is also why I ask this question, you know, because this is not a text that comes through kind of the normal known channels of religious text. You know, it doesn't come from one of our angels. It doesn't come from Jesus Christ, but it comes from an Egyptian entity called Iwas. And I mean, who is that Iwas? Is he an enlightened being, or is he a kind of a demon of some kind? And I mean that does make it is important, you know, where the text come from. And I must say I have not 100% confidence in the text of the Book of the Law, and I think it is correct that it is said that love is the law, but it has a sentence also called love under will. And what does that exactly mean, love under will? This is not how we normally describe love when we talk, for example, about the love in the New Testament. And again, I think we should be careful, you know, where do our revelations come from? Are they really coming from a positive source, or are they kind of a mixed source? Yeah.
Yes.
Excuse me, may I come in there? Would you excuse me just for a moment? I have to nip.
Yeah, you nip, darling. Yes. Yes. But the Book of the Law does appear to be rather a dodgy text. And for a long time, it was a genuine question in our group. Is this in the interest of humanity? But the work that we did and the ritual work that we came up with and the results that we obtained have persuaded me and other people that it is in the interests of humanity. And as to the source, well, why shouldn't it be the same source as the voice that spoke to Moses? How do you know? How do I know? How do any of us know?
I don't.
The scientists now, the physicists who have been doing the quantum science are now saying that space and time are no longer to be considered. There has to be something beyond space and time for our science to frame itself, because all of our science is framed within space and time. There has to be something more, another dimension of being altogether, which isn't space and isn't time, which is bringing stuff into existence. They're almost saying. Not quite, but they're very, very mystical. The very, very high level physicists and mathematicians and physicists. They're incredibly mystical. And they're as near as makes hardly any difference whatsoever as to saying, well, this is as near to God as we can get, beyond space and time. And that is where everything is being informed from. And yes, we were careful with the Book of the Law for a long time. It took us over 40 years to get to where we are now, and it hasn't been a joyride. You know, stuff happens, and things go wrong, and people go mad, and you do wish they wouldn't, but they do.
Might I comment, please? If we look at people's interpretation of the Bible and how varied and multifaceted that has been throughout the history of Christianity, and to take into account all of the atrocities that have been committed by people who have been devout Christians.
Yes.
Yeah, that is the work of the devil, in my opinion.
It's utterly incomprehensible for me how any of those things could ever have been permitted to take place. And yet there it is. And we can't pretend that these things didn't happen. But this is the modern world now that we're living in, and we're looking at the future. And we have to move on somehow.
Yes.
And reinterpreting the ideas that caused all the fuss in the first place seems to be a good idea.
I think in terms of the the age of Pisces, which we are emerging from, where knowledge was held in a 12th house context, hidden in monasteries and institutions. The age of Aquarius, it being about the people, the awakening within one's being, open and simply, not hidden away. And as we were seeing the rise of astrology, certainly in the West, it's always been there, as Hasu said, in the East. But we're seeing it coming into being that people can understand. And how can one be in a negative sense of being if one's illuminated one's consciousness into unity and compassion? Because once one realizes that in our mundane consciousness that we all are from one source and we're all illuminated windows, then how can we be anything other than live in compassion and love for the wonder of it all?
But what about Adolf Hitler? He was also an enlightened being from your perspective.
I think we're moving in an evolutionary fashion. I think humanity is evolving and is always evolving and is continuing to evolve. Our psychology and our spirituality and the shape of our minds and what we're able to think of and what we're unable to think of changes from one generation to the next almost. It certainly changes over 200 or 300 years. People had attitudes 300 years ago which we wouldn't contemplate giving house room to in this day and age. And there's no turning the clock back. People will not revert to medieval practices. Occultists will not be burned at the stake ever again. It's just too, because the world is now joining up And human beings all around the world can now see all the other human beings all around the world.
But
And
there's still a lot of
eventually,
atrocities taking place in this world. Look at the war in Ukraine, and look at what is happening in Afghanistan and in Africa and everywhere. There's still a lot of atrocities taking place and a lot of evil.
Can I
certainly is.
intercede here just for seconds? I'd like to try and bring it back onto a more positive note. Surely what we're trying to achieve as adepts is a positive approach, and that what we should all be is glowing examples, just as Barry and Cath are, of some understanding of the past, the future, and the present, and by our living examples, be examples to others.
Yes, I hope so. I hope so. I do think that's what we should be doing as magicians, as occultists, as philosophers and poets and creative people. This is we should be carrying little torches.
Of course.
I think yes, and I think the I think it's an African story of the hummingbird and the forest fire. The forest fires are raging, and the hummingbird goes to the river and drops a droplet of water on it, and they say, well, why? What good is that going to do? And the hummingbird says, well, I did my bit. And I think that's, as seekers of enlightenment, it's the 12th monkey scenario. The more of us aspire as initiates to bring the balance of light through, then these raging wildfires can be brought to abeyance.
Yes.
I don't think we can get away from what is, but we can do our bit.
We can do our bit for a better, brighter future. Yes, I think so. That's an article of faith I think we should all have in our hearts.
Thank you. I've got a person called Igor with your hand up. Igor, please go ahead.
Are you hearing me well?
Hello there. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Mr. President of Metropolitan Study Group of Frater, Miss Cath, Barry, Brother Hasu from Superiority. I hope you are all well. I hope Geraldine and Bali and Stephen are very well too. There are a few years I don't see them. I used to live in London. I lived in London for a couple of years in a diplomatic mission from Brazil. I hope you all understand my accent, my beautiful and charming accent from Brazil. I passed many years in Freemasonry, and because of this, I have a very strong link with the Western tradition. So I studied the various systems of Western magic, and all of them are based on the Western astrology. And since I heard Brother Hasu speaking about the Vedic Jyotish, I decided to share an experience I had, because the first time when I decided to pay a closer look into the Vedic astrology, I got struck by the signs. They are different in the calendar, in the 12 signs of the zodiac. They are different, and then I decided to question the validity. And also the second thing that struck me the most was that I started to question the validity of the Western tradition, the Western astrology, right? And then actually my question is more to Brother Hasu than for Cath and Barry. I would like to ask Brother Hasu if the Eastern astrology is more accurate than the Western astrology?
Over to you, Hasu.
Well, that's an awkward one, isn't it? Am I better than the next person? You know, and I think that we should not be doing that. We shouldn't be measuring against each other, but we should be certainly looking for the commonality and the benefits of what the subjects are we're dealing with. Both have their nuances and their ideas of interpreting the cosmos as such. So both have valid ways of doing it. One does it in a slightly different manner because it uses a different system, i.e., a solar system, whereas one uses the lunar system. So, you're going to get slight variation, but the predictive nature, as I said early on, the proof of the predictive nature is if an event happens, which has been predicted. Now, if that happens, then the systems are closely aligned. Maybe the proof of that would have been if my father had gone and asked a Western astrologer to do the same prediction for me at the same time, and then see if they match. But I think, these are all matters in my personal, very humble opinion, that to compare is to lose knowledge. And if you lose knowledge, then you're going again back to what we were saying. We are moving to the dark ages. To go one step above and tread upwards, we are going to become better human beings and learn more, and not be saying, look, mine did better than that's what children do in a school. As we grow up, we should be thinking, what can I learn from you? Teach me, rather than saying, I know all this, I'm not very interested. So that's my very simple, but hopefully you answer that makes some sense.
Thank you, Hasu. I think you've answered it so beautifully. I don't know as I can add to that. And I certainly, we look at the commonalities, and the astrology can become so complex, layer upon layer upon layer, that we are going to pull out. We can focus on one point or another and make it a point of difference. The question I ask is, which people often say about a question that come up on astrology, well, the signs aren't in the same place as they used to be. And I say, well, maybe the constellations aren't in the same place, but when they did coincide, are we talking about the influences that come from that segment of the cosmos, of the heavens, that the constellations once coincided with? So there are questions like that can, we can pull out and tease out and so on. But the important thing is, does it work? Has it worked? And that's the world we live in, and we can only go by personal experience. I think at the end of the day.
And I always say to anyone who asks me, I said, well, don't look at tomorrow's prediction. Look at yesterday's stars. If you're looking at your daily horoscope, and see if that came true. Because that's very commercial. You read the horoscope. A computer has generated it without really going into the details that a true astrologer would go into. So, it's like a comfort to know, everything's going to be okay tomorrow. But if it's not, then you've forgotten that in my stars, I read everything was going to be fine, but hang on, it didn't work out. But funny enough, early on, I was looking at something and I put down a thought, and I put my thoughts on my little mobile phone. I store them, and I put down perceptions are the pebble on which the ignorant man stumbles.
No, lovely. Delightful. I was going to add something in there, but I've completely gone out of my head. So back to you. Yeah.
I think it might be worth pointing out that Vedic astrology has a very long history. There's a very long practiced tradition, continuously back for I don't know how many thousands of years. Whereas astrology in the West has kind of come and gone and flourished and died away again and flourished and died away again. And it seems to be beginning to flourish again these days. It did quite well in the Elizabethan period, but then with the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and all the technological advances, it was one of the things that kind of went out the window.
Yeah, but I think to add to that, sorry, is that if you think about it, whether you sort of do up the astrology 100 years ago or 3,000 years ago, you're looking at the same objects in the universe, deciding on how they affect you. So yeah, it's irrelevant when it was developed. It's what you do with what you observe and how you predict.
Yeah.
What is the predictive nature of astrology, if it works or not.
Yeah. So I don't think Western astrologers are quite at the point where they would look at a newborn's natal chart, see a disaster approaching age 20, and dash out and make a talisman to protect said newborn. They're not quite at that level of sophistication yet, but it won't be long. It won't be long.
But were there? That's the thing. As you said, has our progress destroyed that development? That development, which was, talismans were being made. I think, if you go to the Elizabethan age and all that, there were talismans being made for everything, and worn for everything, and protection against this. But so it's not that it didn't exist. I think it existed, but it has our sort of modernization has sort of suppressed it rather than destroyed it.
Yeah.
I sort of had a lot of contact with young people in their sort of 20s and up to the age of 40. Gave a talk to a group who organised festivals a couple of weeks ago, and I'm greatly encouraged by the enthusiasm and the definitely a rise of astrology in the up and coming generations. It seems to be experiencing a revival, which is quite delightful. And I think too, points that Benny has brought up and others, the most important thing in anything is discrimination. To be grounded. Does it work? Is it true? Is it good? Is it happening? And not be carried away in the ethereal miasma. Is to hold true. And if it doesn't work, not be afraid to let it go and put it down.
Yeah.
But also in India now, if you look at, so going back to that part of astrology, very famous scientists are also trying to recognize astrology as some form of predictive nature, some sort of energy force. And many of them actually are writing books about, the astrology and physics or quantum physics, all sorts of things. So you find, if you go into the sort of Indian website for books, there's huge numbers of books written by very competent scientists, very high up. I mean, you're talking of scientists who are in the stuff. We just sent a rocket, a rover sort of thing to the moon, and these are the chaps who still look at even the flight for that would have been decided by an astrologer. He would have looked at times and said, okay, we go, and he would have said yes, and they would have said, look, this is the perfect. And they would still have said, okay, let's not take chances. Let's ask the man. Let's ask the astrologer for some sort of a good sign.
Yes.
Thank you, Hasil. I'd just like to point out we have a hand raised at the Atlantis bookstore.
Carry on, please. Sorry.
That's okay, Hasil.
Yeah, Hasil, just hold it, will you, for a second? We had a very interesting case here at the study group many years ago by a scientist. He was 72, and he spent his whole life making experiments to prove or disprove science. So science is something that you can repeat time after time and you get the same result. So he came and joined us in Rosicrucian because he said that all his fellow scientists in the area of creating experiments to prove and disprove everything, and I do mean everything, they realized that there was something missing, and it's something that you said earlier. There is something definitely not explainable, not something you can demonstrate exactly the same every time you do the same thing, but they don't know what it is. And so really tying into what was just being said there, and there is proof from him that that's the case. And then another scientist, who's actually a spy as well, said that they had determined, I think, like 7 dimensions, which comes back to another point you mentioned earlier. And so the 3 dimensions are the 3. 4th dimension includes time, but the 5th dimension is that, and they've got to 7 dimensions that they can prove theoretically, because it it's business of somebody saying something in the past and somebody knowing it now isn't entirely possible. And one of the things about people writing books, if you look back in history, is that there's quite often 2 people writing the same brand new thing in different parts of the world. There's no explanation of that. Anyway, over. That's all I had to comment.
Oh, by the way, in the Vedas, we mentioned 11.
You would do.
And Professor Kaku, who's a Japanese-American physicist, has now theoretically shown that there may be up to 12 dimensions.
I think it's quite interesting, the thing that as human consciousness evolves, then new planets are discovered. Rather like the story of the galleons in as they're offshore in South America, couldn't be seen until the shaman pointed them out. In that we've had quite a number of new planets and asteroids being discovered and named and so on, which is an interesting development. And maybe this is, as each one appears, that it's an indicative of the evolution of human consciousness that's consistent with the discovery of these new heavenly bodies. Yeah.
In EQ, this unpredictable factor, this unknowable thing that keeps happening, that makes it all not quite the same as it was last time, is Scorpio. Is 93. Is because 93 is time and nature and unity and divide. How can it be unity and divide at the same time? I mean, simultaneously. Unity and divide. It's the ultimate unexpected thing, which is what you tend to get with the moon in Scorpio, which is why Western astrologers, perhaps I should say, won't do a horary, a divinatory chart with the moon in Scorpio, because according to the horary tradition, everything dies with the moon in Scorpio. Events come to an end, and you can't predict the future if everything is in the process of stopping. So horary astrology doesn't happen with the moon in Scorpio. Scorpio is the zodiac symbol. 93 is the numeric symbol of the thing that jumps out and kills you. It's the totally unexpected. It's the thing that should not happen. It's how birds got feathers, according to EQ. That is.
Thank you very much, Cath. We've got the hand up again at the Atlantis bookstore. Over to you.
Yeah, I just had a point really following Alistair's point there. So put a few threads together. I've actually got a kind of background in string theory. I think so I did a PhD in string theory and looking at classifications of 10 dimensions. I've kind of got a bit of a background there. You might ask why am I at the Atlantis bookshop basement for an esoteric Rosicrucian group? And I guess my story and my journey there is for the last 30 years I've also been practicing Tantric Buddhism, and which there are lots of overlaps and similarities, and in my own kind of journey I've always had a foot in both camps. I took myself to church as a child, took myself to visit Hare Krishna's when I was 12, so I've been a kind of a spiritual seeker all the while. I've been the kind of, or at least on the scientific track as well. I mean, I'm not a professional scientist anymore, but I was in that world, quite deeply immersed in it for quite a while. And so I've been quite interested in how you bring those two together, because in terms of the way you use your brain, the scientific mode of thought versus the kind of intuitive mode of thought. I think a lot of the discussion today has been around kind of intuitive faculties. Seem to speak completely different languages, and it's quite hard to see how you get dialogue or communication or meet, how to get those two to meet. But the thing I wanted to flag, and maybe this will feed into Alistair's next kind of question, but there is actually something happening in the world right now, and this has been kind of attested in various people's things, that we're in some kind of epochal change. And online there's a group of people that call this metamodernism. They say the whole of modernity, the thing that's kind of kicked off just after the Rosicrucians, is coming to an end, and that we're entering a whole new time period when we'll move beyond the metaphysics of science and the dominant rational mode, so forth, and we'll have a new kind of outlook on reality, where the rational won't be held up as the sole kind of arbiter, and all the other kind of human faculties will probably rise up, the aesthetic, the poetic, the intuitive. So we'll maybe see more holistic kind of metaphysics there, and a kind of key part of that to me is how the esoteric and the exoteric kind of meet, and so yeah. Over to Alistair.
Oh, no, I was no.
You've spoken loads. Sorry, just very, very quickly, just so the fact that we have a quantum physicist sitting in the basement of the Atlantis bookshop. The fact that if you look at the language of science and spirituality, or science and mysticism, they sort of gone like that, because ultimately they're talking about the same truth, but they were just using a different vocabulary. And they've come to a point now where the scientists are looking at the quantum mathematicians and quantum physicists are looking at the face of creation. Like I've always thought about superstring theory and the 10 dimensions are the 10 Sephiroth of the Kabbalistic tree of life. It's just using, we've come to a point where we've used so many different types of vocabulary that we've gone, actually, we're all talking about the same thing. And science has become so sophisticated now that it's now proving spirituality. And it's coming to a point where there is this kind of fusion where, you're getting a quantum mathematician sitting in a Rosicrucian meeting talking about the birth of existence, or,
It really is a fascinating time to be alive, is it not?
It is, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
So what you were saying there, Alex, about the two things getting to a point where they kind of will naturally link together more directly. This is the kind of Copernican shift in our perception of the wider scheme of creation, and I do really feel strongly about this, that we're on the cusp of this. And when we've in the previous things that have been written in the Rosicrucian pamphlets, which we've been producing for the last couple of years, one of the things that we've been doing is also meditative work from time to time, which coincides very much with what Barry was speaking about tuning into the celestial tides and currents at a particular time and setting an intention. So you're creating something, you're giving birth to a particular thing, or starting a particular timeline of events, if you like. And with Pluto's entrance into Aquarius not so long ago being one of them in March, and we had a meditative link up a good number of us at that time. Likewise, we'll be doing a similar thing on the 21st of January next year, which is when Pluto will enter Aquarius more fully. And that's going to be a 20-year period of significant change and transformation in our perception of our place within the wider scheme of creation. In a similar way to, like, say, I feel that when we used to believe the world was flat and then found out that it absolutely isn't.
You can trace certain historical movements along the line of the discoveries of the planets, like Uranus was in the 1740s sometime, could be said to have kicked off the Industrial Revolution. Neptune took some time to establish that he was there, and it suspected that he was there, but kept missing him, which is what you'd expect with Neptune. But they did eventually confirm that Neptune was there as a planet sometime in the late 1800s. And Freudianism and hypnotism and anesthetics and all kinds of weird gaseous substances were experimented with, and dream states became a talking point, and the occult revival.
And the discovery of Pluto and the birth of the atomic age.
Yes, absolutely. And what I think of as the screen age. And things have been more and more and more and more and more on screen since the discovery of Pluto. And in my view, the Book of the Law and English Qaballa is another indication of this new period, this new epoch, if you like.
I think the relevance of it is that it's marking the time is literally so tight, so easy, and so small. It's just marking the ceremony of the moon's entry into Scorpio. 15 minutes, would you say?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, but you do a little meditation before, and never before of in the past where one had to get enlightenment by going into a retreat, into the Piscean age of withdrawing from life, the world. Now we're in a very, I think the Kali Yuga was mentioned, we're in a material world. So how do we get enlightenment in a world of gross materialism? How do we break through to make that connection? And so it has to be simple, and it has to be available for all, and it has to be able to be seen, which astrology, you're right at the beginning, was saying, about the baby and the reading of the chart, and what are we actually reading? There is the concrete proof that we are celestial beings. So in the modern age, the age of Aquarius, their consciousness has to be available physically and straightforwardly for everyone. And it's not, I don't think it's any coincidence that when Pluto entered into Aquarius earlier on in the year, I think it was around Easter, I think what happened was within a week, AI blew up the examiner into the media. What the heck is this AI? What is this consciousness shift that's happening? Where are we going with this? And then Pluto went retrograde, and it's given us a time to think, well, a pause. And even the the people who are involved in the top of the development of AI said we need a pause. And Pluto, and that coincided with Pluto retrograding back into Capricorn. And so we'll see more of a resurgence. But in January, when it comes back into Aquarius. But already people are saying, well, what's real in terms of the social media? I have a relative who works in this field, and she says already young people are buying phones that are basic, or the fact that we won't be able to believe what we see on the media anymore, on what comes through our phones. We'll say, well, okay, I want to see you face to face. And there is the irony of a reconnection of the human spirit speaking to each other, because that's what we know is real. So it's quite an interesting, as you say, Cath. Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, please, Cath. Go ahead.
I was just going to address a point that somebody else brought up a bit earlier on, about what is going on in this new period, and I just wanted to say that English Qaballa, as a proof of the Book of the Law as a holy book, because it works, is a proof of a power and intelligence greater than human, which most people would call God. And people these days are in a great quandary about whether God exists, what God is it a goddess even? And what does it all mean anyway? And is there any reality in it? Well, this EQ says, yes, there is a design. There is something going on. And on the subject of Pluto, if you remember back to the 1980s, Pluto was in Scorpio, the house of death. And all the old institutions were torn down in the 80s. People stopped doing things on principle and started doing things for profit. And the Berlin Wall came down, which everybody thought would last forever. Suddenly, Soviet Union was no more. As Pluto went through the house of death, all kinds of things broke and stopped happening, stopped being done, and just would not go back into their little bottles, never to be mended. And then when Pluto got into Sagittarius, the sign of long distance communication, we got the internet. And when Pluto went into Capricorn, who's the judge in the zodiac, we got the social justice movement and all its offshoots. And now Pluto's on the edge of Aquarius, and we seem to be getting artificial intelligence. God help us. I'd like to give the AI EQ and see what it makes of it.
Well, there's an experiment for you.
An experiment for somebody.
That's actually a really interesting idea.
I have somebody.
So, sorry, 1 second, please. So we've had Kristen with her hand up for a significant amount of time. Thanks for being patient, Kristen. And I think because of time, it's nearly 3 hours we've been on this call, which is quite a record, really, which is wonderful. But I think we'll let Kristen be the final person to ask or make an observation or comment. So over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Cath, I just have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, if I'm understanding this correctly, you had mentioned everything dies if the moon is in Scorpio. Were you implying that is an unfortunate aspect?
It's not unfortunate if you got moon in Scorpio in your natal chart. Don't worry. It doesn't mean that you're an unlucky person. It just means that you have moon in Scorpio. But for divinatory astrology, which is fortune telling by the stars, you ask a question. then your astrologer draws up a chart for the moment at which you ask the question. That moment being the birth moment of the question, you see. But if the moon is in Scorpio in the chart, then the astrologer can't predict the future because that indicates an end of the story of the moon's progress through the zodiac. It's all stops in Scorpio. It's like a full stop or a hiccup, or when you're walking down the street and you turn to look at something and then you turn back and walk into a lamppost. You could swear the lamppost wasn't there when you turn to look back, and the magic thing just jumped out and bit you. That's what Scorpio does. It does the unexpected.
Yes, it's unpredictable. Yeah,
it's most often an unfortunate change, or appears to be an unfortunate change, and sometimes it works out all for the best. You can't tell.
But it makes
makes
it hard for predictions then.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
To use a popular story, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where he designed a spaceship that worked on infinite impossibility drive, that it got you to where you wanted to be, but in a way that was the last thing that you thought of, or the thing you didn't think of. And Scorpio, the burning way or the via combustor works in a similar way. You can make all sorts of plans on what you're going to do, and it doesn't work out in the way you expected. And it's neither good nor bad. You can say, oh gosh, I'm going to dig the garden and I've got a lot of hard clay to go through. And you find out, you go and do it, and it turns out to be damned easy, or somebody turns up with a digger, that you didn't expect. So it's the
improbability drive.
Improbability drive, yes.
Yeah.
And so it's advisable not to do divination during that period, that 2.5 days, 15 of Libra to 15 of Scorpio, because it is a time of change and flux. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And I'd like to round off by thanking you both, Cath and Barry, on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group of the SRIA. It's been an absolutely wonderful, wonderful presentation today, and a fascinating and fantastic discussion after your presentation. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us today, and also to let everyone know that we have a break in the month of August. So our next meeting will be on the 3rd Saturday in September. So mark that in your diaries, please. If you're able to attend, please do. And we wish you a wonderful summer, or wherever you are in the world. Have a lovely couple of months until we next meet again. And a particular thank you to Barry, because at the moment it's 5:30, 6,
4:20.
4:28. Yeah. 4:30 in the morning. So Barry, thank you so much for staying up and being so alert and on the ball with all of this. It's greatly appreciated to both of you. Have a lovely rest of your weekend, and lots of love to everybody.